in the outer ward of the Tower of London, that's the space between the inner and outer ballium or defensive walls. The inner wall, remember, dates from 1220, it's 50 feet high. The outer one behind you dates from 1280 and in places 28 feet thick. Down there's Mint Street, that's where all coins of the British Empire were designed and produced until the year 1810. The houses which house the Mint are known as the casemates, and they not only serve as a museum, which is that two-storey building behind you, but also as accommodation for my colleagues and our families. This really is my home. The two-storey building's got quite an interesting past. That used to be the home of the Master of the Mint. The Master of the Mint between 1697 and 1727 was a very famous man indeed. His name, Sir Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton right there. Americans, that's where we the English invented gravity. Right, just over there you've got a tall skinny archway, it's called the Sally Port or Royal Entrance, beyond which was a small drawbridge leading out to a set of stairs known as the Queen's Stairs. And these directly access the River Thames. Rather than negotiate the dark, dirty, dangerous streets of London, royalty and nobility would travel in their impressive barges down the Thames. They tie up alongside those gates, which are original, and they date back more than 700 years. Can I just borrow you for a second, please? Thank you very much. Now, it was at those very gates there that King Henry VIII so lovingly greeted his second wife, Anne Boleyn, on the eve of her coronation in 1533. He met her just there, he took her by the hand, which never had a nightclub stamp on it, did it? She's from Florida. He looked her in the eyes and promised to love her for the rest of her life. This man was the King of England, he couldn't go back on his word, he certainly loved this lady for another 3 years anyway. When in 1536 he brought her back through a very different gate and he had her killed. Leave that there, we'll talk about that. Right, this is the bell tower behind me. It's called the bell tower because there's a bell on top of it, up in that white box there. And it's the strongest of the 13 towers on the inner defensive wall. And it has been used to house prisoners. Most famously, a man for all seasons, Sir Thomas More. Lord Chancellor of England, he spent the last 15 months of his life in the lower chamber, just above my head here, for refusing to accept King Henry VIII as supreme head of the church in England. At the same time, and for the very same reason, his good friend John Fisher, the Bishop of Rochester, languished in the upper chamber up there. Both of these men were to suffer terribly, but they could not be persuaded to abandon their Roman Catholic beliefs. Until finally, in the summer of 1535, Henry VIII had had enough of the pair of them. They were led out through the gates there, marched to the top of the hill, where they were both publicly beheaded as traitors. Thomas More's last words were, "I am the King's good servant, but I'm God's first." 400 years later, in 1935, Pope Pius XI beatified both of those men as saints of the Roman Catholic Church. Two very noble men indeed, who died for their beliefs. Now, another man held in this tower was a man called James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth. Anyone ever heard of James Scott? Nope, not many people have. James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, was the eldest of the 13 illegitimate children of King Charles II, called the Merry Monarch for nothing, or indeed Champagne Charlie. Now, after the death of his father in 1685, this handsome and popular young man was persuaded to stake his claim to the throne by virtue of the fact that his uncle James II was a Roman Catholic. They didn't like Catholics in these days. To press home this claim, he landed in the west country of England with a massive army of 87 men, and he marched inland, gaining popular Protestant support in what became known as the Monmouth or Pitchfork Rebellion. The rebellion was crushed at the Battle of Sedgemoor on the 6th of July 1685, but James Scott escaped the battlefield, and he was found a week later hiding in a ditch near the town of Ringwood. He was condemned to death in his absence, so there was no need for a trial. 3 days after arriving back at the tower, he was led out through the gates, marched to the top of the hill, where he was publicly beheaded as a traitor. Now, what have I just told you about a fella nobody has ever even heard of? The reason is simple. This is regarded as perhaps the most botched execution ever to have taken place in English history. The executioner was a man called Jack Ketch. Now, Jack Ketch was a part-time butcher by trade, and most executioners were in those days. They needed to be to carry out their grim trade. In his spare time, though, he was an executioner. He was in fact a hangman, not an axeman. Unfortunately, for everyone who came across him, he was a full-time drunk. These three things are not at all compatible. Now, it's customary in those days to pay your executioner. Two reasons for this. Reason one, it was a religious act. It's one of forgiveness. They believed that by forgiving a man who was about to kill you, this would greatly increase your chances of getting into heaven. Secondly, it was a tip. They believed the more money you gave the executioner, the better a job at killing you he would do. James Scott was not allowed to go to cash point before his execution, so this went a little bit badly for him as a result. On the morning of the execution, he was let out through the gates that we've just walked through, and he was wearing his best clothes. And he took a very slow walk, and why wouldn't he, to the top of the hill. Now, he wasn't booed or jeered as he made his way up there. Remember, he was handsome and popular, particularly with the ladies. He was applauded and cheered as he made his slow way up the hill. Women were crying, drying their eyes with lace handkerchiefs, other things made of lace. These were thrown at his feet. Some of the women were swooning at his feet. He picked a few of these items up. He got to the top of the hill. He mounted the scaffold, dropped a very small purse of money into Jack Ketch's hands. He delivered his final speech. He said his prayers, and when he was ready to die, he fell to his knees. He placed his neck on the block, and he dropped one of the lace handkerchiefs. This was his signal for Jack Ketch to do his work. Jack Ketch brought the axe down, but the blow missed. Landed in his right shoulder, partially severing his right arm. There was a second blow, which again missed. This one took the very top of his head off. His brains are now steaming in the morning air. Quite cool. There was a third blow, which again missed. This one landed between his shoulder blades. Now, history tells us of sorts that James Scott was able to wriggle round and shout, "For God's sake, man, will you please get on with it?" Jack Ketch threw the axe down, refused to carry on. He probably had a little go of his hip flask, and he tried to get off the scaffold. The crowd surged forward. They'd come to see their hero die an honourable, noble death, not what they were witnessing. The sheriffs of London were forced to withdraw their swords. They pushed the crowd back with those swords, turned them onto Jack Ketch's chest and said, "If you don't get on with this fella, you're going to be next." Reluctantly, he picked up the axe. It took 2 further blows. That's 5 in total before he finally dispatched his poor victim. But that's not the end of the story. Remember, the law states the head must be separate from the body for justice to have been served. And all he'd really done was club this man to death. His head was still very much intact. Also remember that by trade he was a butcher, and therefore always carried a butcher's knife. He went down on one knee. He took the lifeless head of James Scott in one hand, took out his knife with the other, and he started to saw through the skin, the veins, the sinew, the nerves, the tissue, the meat. Until finally, the head was separated from the body. However, that's still not the end of the story. Remember, all the heads were placed down there on London Bridge for display. Not so in this case. They brought both his body and his head back inside the tower, and the reason was simple. Immediately after his execution, somebody realised that this man was the son of a king. He was an illegitimate son, but nonetheless the son of a king all the same. And as such, up to that point, nobody had yet painted his portrait. So, they brought both his body and his head back inside the tower and sewed them back together. They put a few homeward banders around his neck. They put a ruff around it to disguise the fact, put a hat on top of his head to disguise the fact that bit was missing, and they knocked up a quick portrait. That took him 24 hours to complete. His head with his, or his body rather, with his head now sewn back on, but then buried in our chapel 24 hours after his execution. I'll show you where later. That's a good story, isn't it? Right, we must be heading around the corner. Yes.